So what we decided to do at this point, this was a classic greenfield for the recruiters in the room. This was a greenfield opportunity. Imagine an opportunity to design a process any way you liked. Okay, you're not bound by a system, you're not bound by convention. So in a way, this was a lot of fun. So we took some time out to pause and reflect before we went out into the West Midlands marketplace, and we thought, what can we do? How can we set this up correctly? And we started by looking at the science, and I'm going to whiz through this very quickly, and I'm sure some of you will have seen this before, but effectively we thought if we're going to design a recruitment process, let's start by listening to the experts. This is a quote from one of my favourite books. It's a book called Work Rules by a guy called Laszlo Bock, who used to be, I'm now told, the Senior VP of People at Google. And they talk a lot at Google about hiring by doing what the science says. The aim of their interview process is to predict who's going to be the best candidate based on the science. So what does the science say? Well, it turns out the science says something quite clear. It says actually recruiting is completely and fundamentally broken. It's the bit that I thought might upset Mark. Actually says the way most businesses right now are recruiting is completely and utterly wrong. And I'll try very quickly, without going on about this for too long, just to explain why it's wrong. The first reason that recruiting is wrong, and if you think about recruiting, it's a very very normal process. You're probably all familiar with this. If you're going into a brand new demographic like Birmingham and you want to hire 400 people, you're probably going to create some job descriptions. It's a good place to start, yeah? And then people are going to send you some CVs and you're going to do some interviews, and that's a pretty well-established methodology and it's a pretty well-established process. But actually it turns out, if you go and study the science, it turns out that 46% of all hiring decisions turn out to be wrong. This is a piece of research done by Dr. Mark Murphy, who wrote a book called Hiring for Attitude, that studied 3,000 hiring decisions, predominantly in the US, tracked them over an 18-month period of time, and worked out after 18 months what happened to the person that had been hired. 46% of the time they'd failed. And when I say failed, I meant they'd quit, they'd been fired, or they'd had a poor performance review in that period of time. So we have a £35 billion recruitment industry in the UK. We have a very well-established process that is wrong nearly half the time, which is kind of an interesting place to start, right? So as we went on our voyage of discovery and thought about how we're going to approach this talent problem in Birmingham, we started from trying to understand why. There are three reasons why. Reason number one, it turns out we're all hardwired to make very poor decisions. All of us, and I've got loads of stuff I could talk about on this. I'm going to pick on one piece of research, my favourite piece of research done on this, and it comes from a team of researchers in the US who studied the hireability of STEM students. Now, this is how the study worked. They created 100 candidate profiles. Actually, they didn't. They created 2 candidate profiles and they sent them out 100 times. Okay? And they sent them out to research institutions in the US, and they wanted to test how biased the academic industry is. So you think about the academic industry, these are scientists, they're logical, they're reasonable people, they think objectively. They wanted to test how that stood up. So what they did is they sent out 100 fake CVs effectively. 50% of the time they sent out a candidate whose name was Jennifer. 50% of the time the candidate's name was John. Everything else about the candidate, about the CV they sent out, about the approach was exactly identical. The only difference was the forename, Jennifer versus John. And after they'd sent the details out, they went and tested and spoke to the researchers who had picked up those CVs and asked them some questions. They asked, how hireable is this person? How competent do you think they're going to be? And how worthy of mentoring do you think they are? What they found was quite interesting and also quite shocking. They found that in all 3 of those categories, competence to do the job, hireability, and mentoring worthiness, the male candidate, John, was always rated significantly higher than the female candidate. And remember, the only difference is the name, Jennifer versus John. It's a very short piece of research. You can Google it. You can go and find it. Most interestingly of all, they then asked a 4th question, which is how much would you pay this person if you hired them? And what they found was that on average, the male student would be paid 13% more than the female student. Now, this graph's slightly misleading, by the way, because it doesn't start from 0. But nevertheless, this should upset people And this is the result of hiring based off job descriptions and based off CVs, and which is attractive to all of our implicit bias that we all have every single day of the week. And it's the first reason why we decided very early on in our project to come and explore the Birmingham Tech talent scene. It's the very first reason why we decided to do something a little bit different.